Welcome back to Biophilic Solutions, a podcast that's all about the human connection to nature.
Nature doesn't just surround us. We are nature. Our bodies, minds, and even our communities are tuned into its rhythms.
But in today's fast-paced modern world, we've drifted away from that connection, and the consequences are showing up everywhere, in the environment, in our politics and culture, and even how we feel about life.
On this podcast, we sit down with leading experts to uncover how nature influences everything, from the way we design our cities to the way we govern, heal, and make meaning of the world.
Rediscovering our place in nature isn't just about feeling good. It's the kind of transformation we need to create a better world.
So let's get to today's episode. Hey, Monica.
Hey, Jennifer.
So, Monica, today we're diving into a big and urgent topic, climate change mitigation in the Amazon rainforest. We'll be exploring a range of interconnected themes, from climate investment models and emerging technologies to the powerful role that Indigenous communities are playing in land stewardship and ecological restoration.
Yeah, Jen. And it's an important conversation, and I don't want anybody to think like the Amazon is so far away and this has nothing to do with me. We are so excited to be joined by Tracey Osborne. She is a faculty member of the University of California, Merced, and the founding director of the UC Center for Climate Justice. She's also the founder of the Climate Justice Standard, which we're going to learn about. It's an innovative framework that is evaluating the social integrity of climate projects to ensure they're not only good for the planet, but fair and equitable.
Such a mouthful because she's so accomplished. That's amazing. So the Climate Justice Standard is all about creating holistic climate solutions that center local Indigenous communities and elevate justice as a core principle, not just a bonus.
And in our conversation, we cover the critical role that tropical rainforests play in climate mitigation and the complexities of carbon markets, which I'm sure you guys have heard about, but what does that really mean? Tracey's experiences in the Amazon have fundamentally shaped her view of our relationship with nature, which we know is our favorite thing to talk about.
It is. Okay. With that being said, let's get to our conversation with Tracey Osborne. Hi, Tracey. We are so thrilled to have you today. We've been talking about you nonstop, so we're so excited that you can make the time to be with us. So thank you.
It's really great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Well, and I love because you're coming to us from, is it Ecuador?
I'm currently in Ecuador. I've been here over the last 2.5 months, and I've got another 2 months to go.
Wow. Okay. I want to hear all about that. But first, start us off, set the scene. The current state, it's kind of a big topic, of climate change, what's happening down in the Amazon, Indigenous communities. I guess that sort of sets the stage of the work that you're doing right now. What's going on? Because we are in a climate emergency, if nobody hasn't realized. Maybe we don't talk about it as much due to the other emergencies that are happening in the United States. But I think we need to center ourselves in that because the planet is the only planet we have. So what are we going to do? So talk to us a little bit, set the scene for us.
Yeah, thanks, Monica. Exactly. We are in a climate emergency. This is an urgent crisis that requires all hands on deck. It requires global action. It's a global environmental issue. And unfortunately, we're not seeing as much action needed by governments at the speed at which we need to see change. And I also want to say that forests are a particularly important space for climate change mitigation, particularly tropical forests. And that's because there's significant amounts of deforestation that's been happening in tropical forests for decades. And when forests are destroyed, the emissions are released. And also when we restore those forests, and when we're replanting and reforesting those areas, we can absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So tropical forests are important sites for climate change mitigation. The Amazon, where I work, and as I mentioned, I'm currently in Ecuador, but the Amazon where I work, there's high levels of deforestation. Over the last 20 plus years, we've seen over 50 million hectares of deforestation loss, and that's the combination of California and Oregon combined. And so we really need to see major action across these spaces. And again, my heart is in the Amazon, my parents are from Guyana, which is one of the 9 countries of the Amazon, and so I feel really committed to the region. But I feel that the work that we're doing here in the Amazon can have benefits and lessons for tropical forests and honestly for natural climate solutions more broadly.
Mhm.
So, but you asked about what are some of the climate actions taking place in the Amazon. Well, there's a range of actions. There are national governments have certain programs, at the state level. I mean, at the national level, the federal level, as well as the state level. There are multi-country engagement and participation and collaboration. There are carbon markets. There are carbon taxes. But I would say that with regards to Indigenous peoples and local communities, I work mostly with those populations. They mostly engage in the carbon market space through carbon offsets. And
Mhm.
so you're probably well aware of the carbon offset. It's a way for entities to reduce their emissions, but companies or individuals,
Mhm.
organizations reduce their emissions by investing in actions taken elsewhere. So, for example, a company who wants to reduce their emissions or be carbon neutral can invest in a project in Ecuador or in Mexico where communities or a company might be growing trees, and there's ways of calculating that carbon, and that amount of carbon as an offset is sold to that company as a way
Mhm.
to reduce, on paper at least, their emissions. And so that's a space in which communities have been more actively engaged. And I would say that there have been a lot of problems and there's been a lot of concerns about the way in which communities have engaged in these projects, but that is currently the way in which they've been most actively engaged. Yeah, and and just to end that, communities play a really important role. They're stewards of some of the most biodiverse and carbon rich areas of the world, and we really, there are many lessons that we could learn from their land use practices, their ways in which they govern and manage those forests, and they definitely need to be part of the solution.
Mhm. Mhm. Do you find that, because I think the carbon, you read about it a lot, right? You'll see in people's, whether that's I was just looking at a publisher earlier and they were saying that they, work on their sustainability, trying to figure out how they can become more sustainable in general as a publisher, but then, it's still paper and books and travel and shipping. And so they then do carbon offsets, which I think is great. But do you feel like, you hear stories of like a lot of these communities being taken advantage of, right? How do you manage that, the sort of injustice in that? Because sometimes they don't have a voice or their voice isn't heard or they don't have the opportunity, the bullhorn's not big enough.
Yeah.
And it feels like some of the work you're doing is giving them a voice, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, the organizations that have the carbon neutrality goals, those are really important and they have really good intentions.
Hmm.
And so the unfortunate issue is that as we've been seeing in the media, there have been a lot of problems with existing carbon offsets. Some of the key issues that have been raised most recently been a lot of the technical issues, a lot of the what are called the sort of the environmental integrity issues. So there are issues around carbon accounting. So the
Yeah.
ways in which the rules for the methodologies are often quite weak, or they're very flexible, and it'll allow for project developers to claim more carbon benefit than the project actually delivers. But there are also other what are called these environmental integrity issues where the ultimately the projects aren't actually producing a real difference. The projects might have been happening anyway. It might have
Mm.
been a kind of a forest plantation. It was already underway, and they're just getting additional carbon money, or the carbon benefit in the end isn't permanent. There might be a fire that comes through. There
Mm.
might be a change in the government. Like we're seeing in the U.S., but in Brazil, under the Bolsonaro administration, there
Yeah.
was significant levels of deforestation during that administration in particular. And so there's issues of permanence. So those are a lot of the issues that we're hearing in the media.
Mhm.
We've also been hearing about the community concerns. And those are issues like uh, around first of all, that communities are largely targeted for any action. And when you really, but at the same time, there's a recognition that Indigenous peoples and local communities are stewards of the land. They're actually protecting the land, but it's their land uses. And so this also means their subsistence land use that is targeted and then limited. And so they lose access to the land for subsistence needs. And one of the reasons that, and again, these are not the main drivers of deforestation in the Amazon. The main drivers of deforestation in the Amazon are large-scale logging. It's actually large ag in particular, so soy, palm oil, cattle ranching. But these activities, and mining actually, including for oil and gas, and these activities continue while the Indigenous peoples, local communities, their land use, their subsistence land use is constrained and limited. And so there's already a real sort of injustice in the way that carbon markets have operated. So, and I'll just also say, just regarding why is it that the Indigenous lands are targeted and not the main drivers, largely because there was early on, there's been a kind of a discourse and a narrative that forests are the low-hanging fruit. They're the kind of most cost-efficient space to reduce our emissions. And in a lot of ways, in order to do that well, it actually costs money. And so because there's this idea that it's a really cheap way to reduce emissions, the price of carbon for forests has traditionally been low. And so it can't compete with the opportunity cost. It can't compete with the value of the sort of mining products and large scale soy. It can't compete in that arena. So it has tended to affect communities. So that again, like that is a real problem of the carbon market. And I do believe, which is why I'm in this field, that there are ways that we can actually transform the carbon market to a transformed carbon market 2.0 that allows for really addressing the main drivers. That's also going to mean an increase in the price. And the truth is that carbon offset buyers are seeking high quality community led projects and are willing to pay very high prices, anywhere from 25 to I've even, heard up to $100 per ton of carbon for a community led high integrity project like the one that we've been developing with the Indigenous peoples of Sariaku.
I just think one of the things, because what you've sort of set up for us, and this is great background, is it's confusing. Right. And so the general, I don't know if we're consumers or the general public, it's hard to understand it. And Jen and I talk about this all the time. If you don't understand it, you're either scared of it or you shut down. You don't want, I can't engage with it if I don't understand it. And so one of the things that is setting up this framework that you're saying, and one is the climate justice standard, right? So I think the Environmental Working Group is a good example on products, right? We are like, I don't know, is it really green? Is it greenwashing? Is it natural? What are all these things? And at least they're giving us like a number, right, on this continuum, ESG, and same thing with like the red list with building products. So there's like great groups. But is this framework or certification, is that something for us to look for? Or if we're working in a company and we're trying to do carbon offsets, we're looking for that. Would the climate justice standard be that solution for us?
Yes, it's definitely the solution. And I would say that there are new standards that are emerging that are doing some really great work.
Great.
Some of those early media and academic articles were really sort of challenging some of the early version of standard. So Vera, for example, is like the largest standard, and a lot of the media really heavily critiqued many of those projects. But there's some new and emerging standards that are doing a really great job. I would say particularly around what I was calling the sort of the environmental integrity issues, a lot of those technical issues around the baseline. So there's some of those innovations are things like, now let's actually not just check the baseline one time. So what the project benefit is compared to. Let's
Yeah.
actually check it after, multiple times after every 5 years, for example.
Yeah.
They're doing a really great job with this sort of more technical environmental integrity area. I would say that even the new standards, in my view, are not tackling and dealing and addressing the social integrity issues, which is really
Yeah.
the realm of the climate justice standard. I would
Mhm.
also say that a lot of the existing standards, they treat communities as beneficiaries, where they're going to, just participate in a project that was already designed and developed, and they will get a payment, oftentimes to individual families that are participating. Whereas the climate justice standard which is a new standard that we're developing, that supports community-led projects
Mhm.
in the nature climate solution space. So again, as opposed to sort of treating communities as beneficiaries, giving them like small payments, we actually, the product is co-designed, co-developed with them. It's
Mhm.
aligned with their cosmologies, their knowledge, and they're more invested in the project. And ultimately, the projects are more successful. I mean, in my view, again, like there's been a lot more attention to the environmental integrity issues. And ultimately, if the communities are not on board, and I've seen this in my own research, if when the communities are not on board, the project will ultimately fail.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so this isn't and again, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. And I do think there's some new methodologies that are coming online that are doing a really great job with regards to these more technical dimensions. But I would say that our intervention and our um, the value added is around this sort of social integrity and community led projects.
Mhm.
So we're really excited about that. And I should also say that carbon, most of the climate standards, the carbon standards, are focused only on carbon offsets.
Mhm.
And again, especially around forests, especially around conservation oriented forest projects, there's a lot of critique. There's a new set of discussions around a contribution model. So a contribution model, it's also recognized in the Paris Agreement, and it allows for a much broader set of benefits. It can be more holistic. And you obviously have to demonstrate that there's a climate benefit, but there's also, you can have very strong biodiversity benefits, very strong social benefits, and it doesn't often have to have the same level of rigor of uh, carbon measurement as in an offset.
Mhm.
In the project that we've been working on with Seriaku, it is actually a contribution model. However, we have gone through the work of a rigorous evaluation of the carbon, where I'm actually going into the field next week to lead with colleagues. We're leading a biodiversity training with them. So we've already done it, but we're doing our sort of the next level. So we want to make sure that we're taking into consideration the climate, the biodiversity, and the community benefits at very high levels. I would also say that, you know, the climate justice standard is about supporting the commons. There's a lot of work being done, and a lot of some incredible work done by Eleanor Ostrom, who sort of recognize that communities, when they have, clear land rights and boundaries, and they have strong institutions and rules, are actually incredible stewards of communally managed ecosystems like forests.
Mhm.
And so this is very much inspired, the climate justice standard, very much inspired by the work of Ostrom and the Commons, as
Mhm.
well as the work of Indigenous peoples and local communities.
Can I ask you a question too? When you talk about going out into, you're out on the land, you're taking people out there. I'm just, I'm always fascinated by the Amazon. So I'm always curious to feel like, what do people sense when they go for the first time? Or are they in awe as much as you might be, even though you're there all the time? Like, what is that sensation or that feeling that you get bringing people there for discovery and better understanding? And how does that make you feel?
Well, I mean, the first time that I went to the Amazon, I mean, I would say that the first time was actually in Guyana.
Okay.
where I did some of my master's research, and it, and also obviously going in multiple times with the Seriaku. And when I go in, and when my friends and colleagues enter, I mean, they are changed. There's no doubt about it. Like, you are changed going into a space that is incredibly biodiverse. It is living, and you can feel the aliveness of it. And also, I think it's not just about, and I think there's a difference when you're going in as a sort of like on a more like ecological tour, as opposed to going in with a community in a community. And I think like either way, you're going to be inspired and moved by the level of like biodiversity and the richness and the vastness of some of those spaces. And you'll be impacted by that. And I think that when you have the opportunity to go to work with Indigenous peoples and really see the forest through their eyes, it is a real, it changes you. I mean, there's a reciprocity in the relationship between the communities and their forest. They don't see a separation between people and those ecosystems in nature. Like, they are part of it. They also, again, like, there's a reciprocity where they protect the forest, and in turn, the forest provides them all of their needs for food, water, shelter, and medicine. And there's also a sacred connection to forests, and where they see forests as alive, as living, inhabited by beings that protect the forest. And it's, and I would say that also another sort of key learning that has come, I mean, not so much from, well, from being there and also being with them, is a real coherence in how they manage the land, sort of the rules that govern their land use, their sort of spiritual life, their economic and their political life, their cultural life. It is incredibly integrated and coherent in a way that we don't have in the Western world. We do not have that. It's clear, like what we say and what we do. I mean, just look at what
Yeah.
we're seeing with the climate, climate issues. I mean, we've been meeting since like the mid 90s. Almost every year we have met. There have been international meetings around the world where country governments meet, NGOs, companies meet to solve the climate crisis since the mid 90s, and emissions have only gone up.
Wow.
So there is no coherence. There is no coherence there. And actually, young people see this. I mean, I'm also a professor. And so I work with a lot of young people, and it is really like heartbreaking when they can they see and they feel, and what they're told oftentimes is, it's individual action. You've got to like ride your bike and turn off your lights, and work hard, and you need to buy your EV, your electric vehicle, and and we do need to do all those things. We definitely need to do everything. We need to do everything that we can. And ultimately, they know that that is not going to be enough, and that it needs more systemic change, and we're not seeing that in the way that we need. And it's it's um it's really troubling. And I also feel we're still in the game. We're still in the game. We can still make the deep changes that we need, but part of it is like a consciousness raising, and
Yes.
consciousness raising and education. And also recognizing that ultimately this is for the benefit of ourselves, of the planet, and future generations.
Boom.
Yes.
All of
God,
it.
I'm like, oh my God. Yeah, I do worry. I worry about the kids, the young kids, and just their mental health around it,
Yeah.
which is really another conversation. But I do want to touch back to something you said, because I think two things: the raising the consciousness, I think, is a really interesting, again, totally different topic to dig into and solve. But I just want to say, Yes, I think that's super important. But I wanted to get back to kind of the note about, the Western world is all about othering and taking. And I hate, I don't mean to be so negative because I'm a very hopeful person, but we have separated ourselves, right? And it's all about conquering, right? It's like conquering and taking. And that just was how expansion happened, right? From the European model into the Americas. And I think that there's a touch of change coming, and that goes back to that consciousness. But I do love part of the climate justice standard, and I think what you're doing in the territory down there is, really thinking about that harmonious existence between the people and the environment, and how they do not see a difference between themselves and the environment. And I think that's a huge thing that we're trying to do here on the podcast is say to people, like, we are all one, right? We're all part of this biophilic world, a concept. We are nature, but the Western world has separated us from it, whether that's from the built environment to the way we're in cars, we're not walking, we're not, biking. So I just want to sort of just put a fine point on that I think that part of the work you're doing is just incredible. And I wanted to talk to you about some of the cops because I feel like, are they getting co-opted? I feel like the last couple ones, some of the reading that I've done and the coverage that I'm reading mainstream, but I'm also reading, more rigorous reporting. It feels like the oil industry is taking them over and they're sponsoring them. And, even the locations that they're in. And then even the US government, trying to fight California on the carbon emissions right now. It just seems stupid, and you're like, what is going on? I understand why, what's going on. But I do think, and I don't even know if I have a question in here, but more of it is here is we need systematic change. We have the corporations and the oil companies and the gas companies have told us it's our fault. We need to worry about our carbon footprint. And yes, that is important. And yes, but how do we get, and I don't know if you have this answer, but you are in it. One of the huge things you're doing with the UC system is I think you founded, right, the Center for Climate Justice. Holy business, that's amazing. Do you feel like that group? I'm as an alum of UC Santa Barbara, it's a huge conglomerate, right? It's a huge group of people. Yeah, and just the campuses. Can they help make that change, that systematic change that has to be done on the corporate and government side? It has to be. Also institutions and individuals, but what's going on? Help.
Yeah, obviously,
Tracey, help us.
obviously, universities, climate action, anything around social justice like that is currently there's an attack.
Yeah.
Because I think of the incredible and important work that's been done around all of those issues. And so I think UC for sure. And I think, universities, really globally play a really important role around education. And, yes, I did found, and I now co-lead the UC-wide Center for Climate Justice, because I recognize that there was, first of all, a lot of UC faculty across across the system that were doing really exciting work and research that aligns with climate justice. And again, it's a relatively new, social movements have been tackling climate justice for a very long time, but it's a relatively new academic field. And so one of the things that we've done, which I'm really proud of, is we created a course on climate justice for undergraduate students that involves faculty across all of the 10 campuses. And it's an amazing course. Obviously my area is forests and I have a lecture on forests. But there's, and I've taught a climate justice course, but there's no way that I would be able to do at that level a course that captures all of these really key areas like social, racial, and environmental justice, natural climate solutions, which I'm in there, but there are others, including lectures on regenerative agriculture, indigenous climate action, community resilience and adaptation, and the just transition. And so we've got these key pillars, and we've got amazing faculty, and the course has been offered across various campuses of the UC. It's also been offered to high school students across the US, to over like 200
Wow.
high school students, and it's going to be offered again in the fall. And we're now creating a version for Coursera, so it can reach.
Oh, because I was saying, like, I want to take it.
Yeah, if it's
Like,
you could take it. We're working on to
okay.
make it available to like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of individuals around the world. So we think this material is really important. And why is climate justice important? It's important because it does what you were basically saying, Monica. It allows us to make the connection between climate change and a range of other social, racial, environmental issues, issues that really touch our everyday lives, that we can really relate to. It's hard to relate to tons of carbon or number of how much carbon is in the atmosphere, like carbon market. It's like really,
Yeah.
no, like you said, it's really complex. And I think if we, from a climate justice lens, a climate justice lens, it connects the dots. It recognizes kind of the disproportionate impact of climate change on the people and the places least responsible for the problem. So it really recognizes that, certain actors and countries really need to take action first, given their sort of historical footprint. And I think also it takes a systems perspective, a systems and an equity perspective, because it's about addressing the main root causes of the climate crisis as opposed to the symptoms alone. And I would say this is exactly what we've been seeing with the COPs, with the climate change meetings. They are addressing the symptoms alone, not the root causes. And without that, we are going to it's just nothing but the same. I mean, I do go to the COPs.
Yeah.
Not everyone, but, I'll go to, I go to them, and I will be going to the next one in Brazil this year. In
Okay.
Brazil, in Belém, because it's going to be in the Amazon. It's going to be and there will be a large presence of Indigenous peoples and local communities. And I want to, be there to support. We'll also be most likely presenting there, and presenting the standard and presenting the project. So I also want to say that I think what's really helpful is when people can see an on the ground example. And so I'd love to maybe just share a bit more about the project.
Yes, please.
In a concrete way, the project that I developed, that we co-developed with the Indigenous peoples, Quechua peoples of Seriaku, which is a really great and concrete example of what a good carbon project looks like. And again, it's not an offset, it's a carbon contribution model, but we've gone through all of the steps that it would require for this to be an offset. Because when we started the project, when I'm a Berkeley alum, but had been at another university, and then came back to the UC system. And UC in 2015 had established a goal to be carbon neutral by 2025, by this year. Since then, they've actually moved away from that goal because they're just going to go strictly toward decarbonization, which is amazing. Okay. But at the time in 2020, when I just re-entered the UC, they had this goal that they were really trying to reduce their emissions, but they recognized a lot of problems with the existing carbon offsets, and they were offering seed funding to faculty and researchers that wanted to develop a project that the UC would eventually buy. I was aware of Seriaku for some time. I would meet, they would present this in international spaces. They would present this really powerful proposal that they called Kauzak Sacha, which means the living forest. And it's about their cosmovision. It's about their relationship to the forest. It recognizes the forest as a living being, inhabited by beings that are seen and unseen, that protect the forest. And they in turn will protect the forest for these beings. And also really key is that there's no extraction in the living forest. So when I had heard about this, I was just so clear that this is the type of project and proposal that carbon offsets and carbon projects should be following. So approached them to see if this was at all something of interest. They had had an earlier experience, just with the very beginning experience with a project developer who wanted to work with them, and they ended up saying no because they didn't feel that it reflected their interests or their vision. And again, it was really about constraining their own land use.
Mm.
So I said, look, what do you think if we create this project based on Kalzaksucha, the living forest proposal? And they were ready to go. And so it's been a long process, but it's been just incredible. First of all, we used an existing standard, but we had to really translate their Kalzaksucha living forest proposal in a way that was readable, legible to the carbon space. And so it was a lot of work in trying to sort of figure out how to hold true to the proposal, to the living forest proposal, but in a way that would make sense in a carbon, as a part of a carbon project. And so that there's a lot of work done there. We work really closely with them around the monitoring. And I really say that it's a co-capacity building because they already had a system for monitoring their forests, and we supported with technology. They're now using drones, they're using mapping and satellite imagery to be able to identify any areas where there might be any deforestation so that they can then address it.
Wow. That's incredible.
They also use camera traps to be able to monitor biodiversity. The funding, so they have what's called a life plan, and this is their vision for the type of development that they would like to see in their communities. And it involves, for example, in their life plan, involves electrification with solar. It involves, and I should say that there are, in most of the Ecuadorian Amazon, there's a lot of oil. There's 5 oil blocks. They have an area of land of about 135,000 hectares. And in their territory, there are like 5 oil blocks. And there's already an oil well that's been closed down, but there's a potential for like oil development on their land. And so they've been able to, better protect their land from those types of threats. But the life plan involves the electrification. It involves health systems, health clinics that involve both sort of traditional medicine, like sort of Western medicine, as well as their traditional ecological medicine, their ancestral medicine. Education that involves like Ecuadorian, like sort of regular Ecuadorian education, as well as traditional knowledge. So they really want to make sure that it's development on their terms. And as
Right.
I mentioned, the funding would go toward the support of these life plans, these indigenous life plans.
Mm.
As opposed to what we've seen in other projects where they're like given out to families, and again can really disrupt the commons. And so those are some of the ways in which the project, some of the key features of the project. And I would also say that one of the, and this was a bit of a struggle with the standard that we were using, that they really wanted us to focus and include in the project only the standing forests. And Seriaku was very clear. They said, no, we need to include the entire forest because it's the way we manage the entire forest, including our agricultural areas. That's why the forest is as intact as it is. And the name of this project is Kausai Nambi, which means way of life, because it's it's their actual way of life, their everyday way of life. That is the reason that forest is as intact, as biodiverse, and as carbon rich.
And to clarify, when you say the standing forest, do you mean the trees?
Yeah, I mean,
versus everything all the other biodiversity around the trees.
Yeah,
That's
so
an interesting detail.
Yeah, it means just the areas where there are existing standing forests. I mean, they live in certain areas that are obviously cleared. They have agricultural areas that are on a polycultural rotational system. And, the standard that we were using only wanted us to include just the standing forest, the zones where they're standing for in intact forest. And again, the Seriaku were really clear we need to include the entire territory
Yeah.
because that's the reason that intact forest is as it is. And so Because when we recognized that this standard that we were using, first of all, it was very clunky for Indigenous leadership, for an Indigenous-led project. We recognized that this project went above and beyond what even a good project in this standard typically does. And we needed to brand it as something else. And we needed to scale what we've done with Seriaku, certainly across the Amazon. And our goal is definitely across tropical forests globally.
Tracey, it's, Monica, we always talk about hope, and every single word you shared with us is just that bottom line thread of like hope, like the education piece. Like we got to bring the younger people in to understand we are not all in silos. We cannot exist in silos, but this is how we've been and how we're creating these infrastructures that make no sense. Like Monica was saying about, it's all about capitalism and how much we just wash away to whatever, but really understanding that it is a full biodiverse ecosystem that we all exist in. And without one thing, we can't have the other. So I love the fact that you are getting the younger and younger people involved and excited, and just the interest, like you even said, like they're scared or might be in trouble, but it's an understanding, like, how do we then map a better future for ourselves? It's really beautiful. It's a really beautiful thread. And I love hearing that you're doing this work because it's so hopeful, but it's also like, of course, like shaking, like, of course, this is how it should be. I mean, come on, it's the Indigenous way is the way. It is, we are all one unified body together. And how we learn from our ancestral roots is, I think, the most beautiful way to understand who we are today.
Yeah. And, Indigenous peoples, they know the land. Mm-hmm. Indigenous peoples to a particular area, they know that land better than anyone.
Yeah.
And they're stewarding, they're protecting that land. They're the ideal, sort of lead to like restore those areas. And we can really take more and need to take more, like learn more lessons and adopt their solutions very quickly. And we see the climate justice standard as a way to really scale what we've done in Seriaku, but at a much more rapid rate. For a typical carbon project, it will take about 3 to 5 years to develop a project from like concept to implementation, to getting it out where you can sell credits. That is too long.
Yeah,
that is not possible.
Mm-mm.
And so we're working with some tech advisors, but the intention is to, as part of the climate justice standard, is to develop a set of sort of capacity building educational tools. So first of all, I mean, you had mentioned earlier on, Monica, this system is very complex, and it's very complex for everyone, and it's complex for communities who might be involved. So part of what we want to do is like an educational system. So like a kind of a capacity building around like, what are carbon offsets? What are carbon markets? What are the risks? What are some of the opportunities if you are approached by these so-called carbon cowboys who are coming in and trying to take land and like convince them to join these projects? Right. These are the things you need to ask for. And we also want to like offer trainings around, for the importance of forest governance. What does the monitoring look like? Monitoring, reporting, and the verification systems. What does that look like? What about life plan? Like how do you develop a life plan? And also for a lot of these groups, it's a lot of money that would come in for the first time. So we also want to do some trainings on fund management.
Yes.
But as I was mentioning, their technology we need technology. We need technology to help speed up this process. But it can't be technology first. It needs to be technology in service of the needs. And again, I think taking the lead of communities that have really sort of demonstrated protection and sustainable management of forests.
So I think that's really interesting. The technology in service, and you're giving great examples of how you're using the technology in service, right? It's not first; it's how it's beneficial. Are you getting interest being, obviously anchored in California? Are you getting interest from tech people, so much of what we do that is like great things to do, the money doesn't follow because people don't see an ROI, or there's no,
Yeah.
there's just no way to, banks and investors. But then, tech companies get all excited, shiny new. There's the good and the bad in that. Are you seeing any interest in like tech companies? Because obviously the tech guys, the bros, can be really beneficial. They do, they've got a lot of bad, but there's a lot of good that can be done. And if we can turn, I'm not deep into that world, but
Yeah, there's a huge area, emerging area around climate tech.
okay, great.
And so there's a lot of interest in using tech to address a whole range of problems associated with climate change mitigation, adaptation,
Mm-hmm.
measuring. And we've been in close conversation with a number of tech companies, either that can develop platforms that we might use for the platform for the standard. But we've also been in conversation with tech companies that use satellite imagery to measure carbon in trees. We've also been in conversation and have a collaboration with an organization that will help us with like the handheld device in the field. So when the forest guards are patrolling, or when the monitoring team is actually patrolling the land, they have a handheld device that could be the information that will capture the carbon benefits, any type of deforestation or land use change, any biodiversity benefits. That information could be loaded onto the platform and really facilitate the ability for communities to to develop the projects and also to, deliver and write the reports. So yeah, there's definitely been interest from
That's
tech
great.
companies in this space as well as in the work that we're doing.
That's great. As we're sort of wrapping up, I mean, I think what you're giving us a ton of hope, right? And I guess one of the questions would be, is there anything we haven't covered, or how can people support you, or when are the Coursera, the course, like, because I do think education's super, super important. And, we can put a ton of stuff in our show notes of everything, but like sort of as a final thought or anything we haven't touched on.
Yeah. I mean, I think like kind of the theme that we've been covering is around the hope. And I think that we like the time to act is now. Like
Mhm.
at this point, like we've tried the kind of the traditional ways, the climate cops, and we've seen how ineffective that has been. So the
Mhm.
time now is to act. Indigenous peoples and local communities are really showing the way, and we need to adopt those solutions
Mhm.
as quickly as possible and invest in communities and in the work that they're doing and in the frameworks that'll facilitate their solutions being out in the world. And so in terms of support, we're definitely looking for collaborators, partners, financial supporters for the Kausai Nambi project in the Ecuadorian Amazon, the Sariaku's project.
Mhm.
The project has generated over 5 years, it will generate 300,000, a little over 300,000 tons of carbon over 5 years.
Wow.
And so again, it's a contribution model, not an offset. So
Uh-huh.
for companies who have ESG goals, like it would be a really fantastic product. It's a really sort of best in class option. And then
Okay.
also, we're developing as you know, the climate justice standard,
Yeah.
which allows us to scale the work we've done with the Sariaku, that model,
Mhm.
across the Amazon. And we're looking for partners, for collaborators, for financial supporters to be able to really sort of build this model, including with the tech platform.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it was really like fantastic to chat with you both.
Ah,
You as well.
this is amazing, Tracy.
I know.
Thank you so much for your time. Like, honestly, this is such a cool project you're working on and then the bigger stuff. And makes me, Jen, we're going to have to go to COP, Brazil to hear you present. I'm like, how do we get there? Let's figure that out.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Tracey, thank you so much for your wisdom and for sharing. Because again, like we're all about hope in biophilic solutions. So you're really helping us and like lead that pack of like, how do we become better stewards for our own backyard to understand the importance of it all. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thanks again for having me.
Jen, that conversation was so fascinating. I know I say it a lot, but I could have talked to her forever. She weaves together climate investment, technology, and Indigenous stewardship, in a really deeply inspiring and like, honestly, it gave me hope.
Yeah, I could totally agree in so many ways. And she's so incredibly accomplished. I mean, she's so down to earth, but also academically and professionally, just so beyond. But what really stayed with me was how she described her first trip to the Amazon and how no one leaves the rainforest unchanged, which I completely could agree with.
Absolutely. And, building on that, the perspectives of the Indigenous people, she just, that shifted her, and how you think, right? We've talked about it in the past of like, we really need to rethink these like thoughtful ways that we're inheriting the earth and how we're using our resources. It's a deep-rooted understanding that they have that humans are part of nature and the recognition that the land is here to sustain us. So we need to sustain the land.
Absolutely. And she called it a kind of consciousness raising, which I couldn't agree more with. And I love that idea and concept. It's something we desperately need more here in the West. And I do think we're slowly moving in that direction, but I'm hopeful at least.
Yeah, always hopeful. Anyone looking into carbon offsets or climate contributions in good faith, it's really reassuring to know that projects like this exist and that they're being approached with like rigor and respect.
Yes. And personally, I really appreciated how Tracey broke down the current climate investment model. That was so interesting to me. And she showed both where we are falling short and how it could evolve into something more transparent and constructive.
We've included tons of links in the show notes, as always. So definitely take a look and please dive deeper. And big news, we'll be back next time with our 100th episode.
Can't believe it. I'm so excited.
I know. All right, Jen. Talk to you soon.
Bye, Monica. Thanks so much for tuning in to Biophilic Solutions.
If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow and subscribe on your podcast app and leave a 5-star rating because your support helps us reach a wider audience.
And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to share it with your friends.
We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another engaging conversation. See you then.